oldest Sunday newspaper. What is the future for our historic media brands in the new online world? For that and more, join me after the news.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, Amazon has denied claims it planned to include the cost of US tariffs in the price tag of products on its main website. Donald Trump's press secretary has hit out at the reports.
This is a hostile and political act by Amazon. Why didn't Amazon do this when the Biden administration hiked inflation to the highest level in 40 years?
Caroline Leavitt has been speaking at the White House as Donald Trump reaches the end of the first 100 days of his second term as US president. Amazon says it was considering listing import charges on certain products on its budget site in the US. 3 people have been taken to hospital after a shooting in East London. It happened in Forest Gate just before 3 o'clock this afternoon. The courts heard 2 men accused of cutting down the Sycamore Gap tree filmed themselves on a moronic mission. Prosecutors claim Daniel Graham and Adam Carruthers kept a wedge of the landmark, which they deny. And Kneecap's performance at the Eden Project has been cancelled following criticism about comments the band made about Tory MPs. It's alleged one of the rap group's members called on fans to kill local politicians. They've apologised to the family of Sir David Amess and Joe Cox. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 46 points at 84.63. The pound buys $1.33 and €1.17. LBC weather clear for much of the UK tonight. Only some rain for Shetland, otherwise settled and relatively mild. Lows of 5 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. Do you want the words of the day? America wants our land, our resources, our water. These are not idle threats. Trump is trying to break us so America can own us. That will never happen. And that was the battle cry of Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister and Liberal leader, just after winning his snap election this morning. This is really big news. Here is the leader of the country most directly threatened by Donald Trump, fighting back and so far winning. Let's remind ourselves that even as Canadians went to the polls, Trump was still calling for Canada to be the United States' cherished 51st state. He said of the border between the two countries, "No more artificially drawn line from many years ago. Look how beautiful this land mass would be." But Canada, says Carney, is not America. And if his victory was a reminder of the importance of standing up to bullies, maybe there are questions for us here in the UK. Shouldn't we be sending from time to time the same kind of robust two fingers message to the Trump White House, rather than giving him another state visit and nervously minding our P's and Q's? The answer to that, I guess, is that we desperately need a trade deal, and Trump, unlike Canada, hasn't been punching us in the nose recently. Surely it is sensible to try to get on if we possibly can. But the answer to that is that we have a summit to reset our relations with Europe coming up next month, and perhaps we will have to choose. And our trade with Europe is vastly bigger than our trade with the United States. And the EU, for all its infuriating bureaucracy and small-mindedness, currently seems a more reliable partner than the Trump administration. So some big choices 100 days in from Trump's second inauguration, and a good day, therefore, to talk about all of this. Let's start with Jamie Poisson, host of CBC News' daily podcast Front Burner, which is the #1 Canadian daily news podcast. Jamie, very good to have you on the show. First of all, the immediate reaction, celebrations around Mark Carney and the Liberal Party, but there may be an economic and political hangover to come if Trump takes this very badly.
Yeah, well, going into our election yesterday, the president, of course, tweeted that Canadians should vote for whoever will make Canada the cherished 51st state, which I guess was a bit of an evolution from his other posts and comments, he seemed to be suggesting that Canadians should vote for him. So none of the candidates yesterday want anything to do with being the 51st state, but it really is unclear what the next steps are here. When Mark Carney spoke with Trump several weeks ago, they decided that they were going to wait and have a conversation after the election, regardless of who the prime minister would be. That is now Mark Carney. So I think we're expecting that they'll be speaking in the maybe coming days, in the coming week.
So what kind of relationship do you think is going to evolve between Mark Carney and Donald Trump?
It's really hard to say. I think it's very fair to say that the relationship between our former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and Donald Trump was fraught. Trump seemed to enjoy and revel in calling him governor of Canada. And
I remember, yes.
Lots of reporting that he thought Trump was weak. I think one of the words, lots of reporting that Trump thought Trudeau was weak. Some reporting that he called him a Twinkie. When Mark Carney spoke with Trump a couple of weeks ago, we really weren't sure what to expect, but they came out of that call and it all seemed kind of calm. Trump said that they had a productive and nice chat, and then actually he receded from his rhetoric around the 51st state and Canada for a couple of weeks until yesterday, until the election. So it's not clear to me how their relationship will. Yeah.
Just tell us a little bit about the evolution of Mark Carney, because we remember him here in the UK as governor of the Bank of England, and a very sort of urbane but clipped, quiet, sort of caricature almost of elite Davos man, and
Yes.
about the most unlikely populist leader I can imagine. So what's happened?
Yeah, I mean, still that guy. So we know Mark Carney very well here in Canada. We remember him well from the 2008 crisis because he was, of course, the governor of the Bank of Canada then. And he was quite popular at the time for being a calm voice through that crisis. There have been rumors that he would come back to Canada and that he might want to pursue a career in politics for years. And then finally, he threw his hat in the ring in January. It was very unclear at the time how that would work out for him. At the time, the Liberals were basically dead in the water. I'm talking like 45 seats before Trudeau stepped down. And Mark Carney was able to essentially bring them back to life. He won the Liberal leadership race. And
it is sorry to jump in, but it is a Lazarus-like revival of the party.
It's
quite an extraordinary thing that could only have been achieved by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, this perhaps sounds a slightly strange question, is there now a slight sense of menace in Canada?
Like that we feel like there's menace coming from the United States?
Are you worried about what's coming from the United States?
Very much so. I think it's one of the key drivers of the results of the election that we saw. That was one of the central ballot questions, how to deal with Trump. Mark Carney won that ballot question. Essentially, all the polling shows that people felt that he was the best person to go up against the U.S. president. We have lots of tariffs on us currently, fentanyl tariffs, auto steel tariffs. And so I think there's a lot of anxiety here about how this could all play out.
All right, Jamie Poisson, it's been a very, very good day for Canada's Liberals, but there's a long road ahead. Thank you very much indeed for talking to me. So I was saying right at the beginning that we have a kind of choice about to move nearer to Europe or try very, very hard to get on as best we can with Donald Trump. So what is the best response? Let's put that to Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform UK, who are bracing themselves for a pivotal day on Thursday in the local elections. Richard, I suspect when asked to lean more towards Europe or lean more towards the White House, I kind of know which way you're going.
Well, I think actually you're creating a false choice here, Andrew. What any leader of the United Kingdom needs to focus on is how to make life and conditions and prosperity better for British citizens. Yeah. And the reality is that our economy is spluttering at best. But the European economy, the EU, Germany, France, they're in recession. That's the reality. So why would we want to look towards the EU as an answer? The truth is we've got to focus on our domestic situation, stop wasting government spending, cut taxes, cut daft old EU regulations. And yes, we look overseas, but why would you want to align yourself closer to a failing economic model?
Let me give you one answer, which is that they're about to spend 160 billion euros on defence. And we have big defence companies, and if they're able to get access to that money, it's fantastically good news for British Aerospace and Babcock and the other big companies.
But the price of that seems to be we've got to sell out on everything else. We've got to sell out on freedom of movement. We've got to sell out our fishing industry. No thanks very much. We're not going to allow that to happen. Maybe we should be saying, actually, yes, fortunately, the Prime Minister has listened and learned from the Reform UK contract. He's now committed to spending 2.5% and then 3% of GDP on defence spending. Maybe we should be saying to the Americans, we'd like to buy more of your fantastic defence systems as well as more of our own UK systems. Maybe that's the opportunity for extra growth linked to the American economy, which has been growing and will grow much faster than the EU economy. But there's another reason why actually we need strong relations. We always need strong relations with our most important strategic trading and security partner. But that is because Europe needs the US in order to help try and get to a ceasefire, an enduring ceasefire in Ukraine.
Well, we don't know what the US is going to do, whether it's going to help us or not, of course, at this stage.
Which is why we need to be working very closely with them.
Let me ask you about Donald Trump. This is his 100 days today. Reform voters were the only group really inside the UK who were very positive about him at the beginning, and that support has absolutely crashed. Your supporters no longer like Donald Trump in the way they did even a few weeks ago. Is it a problem for you, the way that Trump has been behaving with the tariffs, what he's been saying about Ukraine and his apparent tilt towards Putin? That is a difficulty for your party, is it not?
Well, I think the reality is we're still doing extremely well in the polls. We're leading in most of the polls. It's hard to sort of quantify that. But look, yes, I mean, some people don't like the way that he's conducting himself, and we'd rather not have tariffs. But equally, we've got to get to a situation here domestically. I think people are overplaying this tariff situation. I think the government is deliberately using it as a sort of smokescreen for its own economic failures here in the UK. We've got no growth. We are borrowing huge sums of money, 152 billion in the year to March. And those are domestic problems. They're not linked to our trade with the US. But I repeat the point. The truth is that if we want peace in Ukraine, and I think everybody wants to get to a peace in Ukraine, difficult compromises always have to be made to get to a negotiated settlement.
But at the moment, the compromises all seem to be being made by Kiev, not by Moscow.
We know that you should take Donald Trump seriously, but don't take everything literally. And we know that just in the last few days, what looked like a very interesting discussion between President Trump and President Zelensky on Sunday at the Pope's funeral, for example, subsequent comments against Putin. I think there's a lot of irresponsible rhetoric about what President Trump is trying to achieve.
Mainly coming from him, I would say.
People may not like his approach, his personality, what he says. But let's actually focus on the objective. And the objective has to be to get to a peace.
All right, let's ask you about something we're going to be talking about much more later in the show, but I know you have strong views about. Have you seen Tony Blair's quite remarkable assault on the government's net zero policy?
Isn't it splendid?
Today?
It's another.
It's your language, isn't it?
It's another senior Labour figure that is listening and learning from Reform UK. So Tony Blair is now recognising what I've been saying for years in the face of a torrent of abuse, that actually net zero is not affordable, it's not sensible, and the British people will not put up with it for very long.
It's not the reason for very high energy prices in this country, though, is it?
It absolutely is.
The overwhelming reason is the wholesale cost of energy.
No, I'm afraid, Andrew,
and the global gas price.
That is simply not true.
I've seen the numbers. It is true.
Andrew, gas as a wholesale element of the component of electricity is about 30 to 32%. The rest is tariffs, levies, subsidies, policy
there's
costs
VAT and there's all stuff. But if you look at the numbers that is actually directly attributable.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that other countries that have a higher percentage of gas generation than we do have much lower electricity prices, which knocks your argument completely to the floor.
I would point you to France and to Germany, which actually have a lower component than we do of gas prices. The Germans use coal. And the French use nuclear. The answer is nuclear.
What about America? Well, yes, I wouldn't want nuclear, but what about America? America's gas prices, electricity prices, about a quarter of ours. Why? Because they use their own domestic shale gas, and so should we. That's the way to cheap electricity. That's the way to being more competitive and higher growth.
Well, we'll go into this more later in the show, but for now you've got a very, very important series of elections. Just one thought about how you think things are going to go on Thursday.
Obviously, hopefully, very well. We've had a massive campaign. We've got local elections, mayoral elections, parliamentary by-elections. Look, we hope we will do very well. Some will go well, some will inevitably not be quite what we wanted. That's the nature of it, but it won't be through lack of trying.
All right, Richard Tice, thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. Now, as I've been saying, it's been a bad day for net zero. It's taking the blame for yesterday's enormous power outage in Portugal and Spain, and it's become the target of the former Prime Minister Tony Blair. Find out why next. You're listening to Tonight with Andrew Marr, and the time is now 6:16.
LBC. Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:18. Right, let's go back to that huge blackout in Spain and Portugal we were talking about yesterday. Why? Because we really don't know what caused it. Was it Russians? Was it solar flares? Inexplicably weird weather? What? The answer matters because it affects whether the same thing is likely to happen here. The Daily Telegraph has put the cat among the pigeons, and personally I feel rather sorry for the pigeons, by stating that the real culprit is net zero. Mind you, the Daily Telegraph thinks that net zero is responsible for pretty much everything that's wrong in the modern world, from crabs to the BBC, not forgetting Meghan Markle. Anyway, the argument goes that wind and solar power driving the electricity system with less resilience than fossil fuels with their turbines, which keep rolling when the power suddenly drops, or something like that. I haven't the faintest clue what the truth is, but my next guest probably does. Adam Bell, head of energy policy at Stonehaven, was the former head of energy strategy at the Department of Business under the Conservatives, and he joins me now. Adam, thank you very much for joining the show. You'll have seen the argument that it's because the Spanish and Portuguese relied so much on renewables, in particular solar power and wind power, that they suffered this huge outage. Is that a fair argument?
So I don't think it's a fair argument. I think the picture, unfortunately, is a lot more complicated than that. If you like, I can give you what we know from the events of yesterday happened in real time, just to give you a summary of how the events unfolded, to give you a better explanation of how the grid fell over, if that's helpful to you.
Yes, please. As simply as possible for people listening. I know.
Absolutely. So what we know is that at some point yesterday, something significant came off the grid, whether it be a large generator or some other form of asset that received a frequency interruption. Then, about 1.5 seconds later, the system did what it should and started producing more power just to compensate for the loss of that generator. Then something else fell over. We still don't know what. And that's caused enough of a dip in the frequency at which electricity is generated to cause the wire between France and Spain to also disconnect. And at that point, Sorry, go on.
Sorry to jump in, but listening to you, you are absolutely clear that this is a series of technical failures, not some kind of cyber attack, not some strange eruption on the sun that's changed the atmospheric situation. It's a technical failure.
So there is a slightly unspoken kind of unanswered question around whether those things that fell off the system were something that received an attack on its control system. We don't know that. However, if someone had discovered that their power plant wasn't responding anymore, they would almost certainly tell somebody. So until we've gone through every single asset in the system, I'm pretty confident saying it probably wasn't a cyber attack. It's most likely a technical failure in a power plant somewhere in Spain. We're still trying to figure out which one. The system operator has said it's most likely a solar plant, but we just don't know.
Can I put to you, and you know, you are talking to somebody who is no kind of expert on this at all, but as I understand it, the argument that I read in the Telegraph about the involvement of renewables is that fossil fuels have a system which involves turbines and, as it were, a buffer system. The turbines keep running, even if there's a sudden drop in power going into the system, but the renewables don't have that buffer, and that means the sudden catastrophic failure of power is likelier if you've got a lot of renewables in the system.
So
can you explain why that's wrong?
So it is true in part, but in this particular case, the answer is incredibly complicated. So I'll try to put this as simply as I possibly can.
Okay.
Essentially, when the frequency drops, when there's less power being produced, generators that have a spinning component like a big turbine, that turbine keeps rolling and therefore keeps producing power and therefore reduces the risk that you go down to zero. Now, what happens with some renewables that have what are called a grid-forming inverter is they respond to that in a similar way. And certainly in the Spanish grid, there are a lot of nuclear power plants that provide inertia, and hydro and other forms of non-fossil generation too. What does appear to be the case is that there are a large number of plants that have an older form of inverter called a load grid following inverter that were less able to compensate for some of the change in electrical current.
Right.
So it's less to do with renewables and more to do with essentially the control systems around them. And that to a degree would apply to almost any particular kind of grid mix.
Adam, thank you very much. I take away from that, it wasn't the Russians, it wasn't the sun, it was stuff going wrong. But thank you very much indeed for explaining it to us. Now we're going to stick with net zero because today the former Prime Minister Tony Blair launched a pretty devastating criticism of government policy in general and by implication the Climate Change Secretary Ed Miliband. Writing in the foreword to a new report, Sir Tony said that political leaders knew the net zero debate had become irrational, but they are terrified of saying so for fear of being accused of being climate deniers. The current approach, he said, was not working, and the inconvenient facts showed that any strategy based on phasing out fossil fuels was doomed to fail. The former Prime Minister added that people were being asked to make financial sacrifices and changes in lifestyle when they know that their impact on global emissions is minimal. Now, if you listen to that language, it's far closer, as I was saying, to the Conservative press and to Reform UK than it is to the language of Keir Starmer or Ed Miliband. This feels like a major, deliberate intervention of a kind we haven't seen before. And you almost wonder if the aim isn't to elbow Miliband, who's been very close to Starmer, out of the cabinet. Let's talk to one Labour MP who has been a long-time critic of the net zero policy, Graham Stringer. Graham, very kind of you to come in. So you read this Tony Blair critique, and I assume you by and large agree with it.
I do. I'm not sure I agree with you that the Prime Minister will find it unhelpful. I think at the moment the government is running contradictory policies. They want to grow the economy. They need to grow the economy. The growth in the economy, in any economy, depends on the price of energy. And however complicated the sums are, the way that the drive to net zero is going, it is pushing up the cost of energy.
It may be pushing it up, but the really big problem, as I was saying to Richard Tice, and I stick with this, is the global gas price. It's the wholesale gas price, and we are very, very exposed to that. And the element of the price, which is renewable, is pretty low, and it's certainly not going up very much at the moment.
There is some truth in that, but if you're charging domestic users and commercial industrial users for the price of renewables and green policies, and you're putting that on top of the bills, there's no doubt that increases the cost, and that damages our industry. We've more or less lost steel, we've lost aluminium, we've lost paper, we've lost a lot of the industry.
So to get back into industrial, but get back to manufacturing, you have to cut the energy price.
We're also making ourselves dependent on slave labour in China for the voltaics. And we're basically helping the Chinese economy and damaging our own economy.
Listening to, or reading in sort of the tone of what Tony Blair was saying, it seemed to me to be pretty directly aimed at Ed Miliband. Do you think the Climate Change Secretary is now in some political trouble?
I think his policies are in deep trouble. Who Keir Starmer decides to have in his cabinet is up to him, and whether Ed Miliband stays, if, as I hope, that the expensive rush to net zero is stopped, then it will be up to Ed Miliband whether he stays, and it will be up to Keir whether he keeps him. But I think the basic view is moving against net zero because it's cost. And one of the points you made earlier is absolutely true. We're probably putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere by transferring industry to China and Southeast Asia than we would do if we kept producing things here.
I guess the problem for Ed at the moment in all of this is he's under criticism, as it were, from the blue Labour people in the party who are very, very worried and very interested in reindustrialisation and all of that, but also now from the Blairites as well. It's coming from both sides, and this is something that we haven't sort of seen before. Do you think that, as has been suggested to me, this is Tony Blair, in a sense, providing some kind of political cover to allow Keir Starmer to change the policy quite dramatically?
I do. I mean, Tony Blair, I don't think, would make a big move like this without informing Keir Starmer. He's been very supportive of him. He's not doing this because he wants to damage a Labour government. He's doing it, I assume, because he thinks it's genuinely right. And Keir Starmer wants to get out of that corner. I'm going to be asked in a few months to vote for benefit cuts while we are burning North American forests in the Drax power station at a huge cost. That's damaging the atmosphere. We can't carry on with crazy policies like that while we're asking poor people to have even less benefits.
So let's be absolutely blunt. Is this Tony Blair giving Keir Starmer the cover that he may need to dismiss Ed Miliband?
Well, I don't know whether he'll dismiss him, but I think it's giving him the cover to completely change the policy. If he wants to dismiss Ed Miliband or Ed Miliband wants to leave the cabinet, that's up to him.
I mean, there are arguments that actually, the net zero drive is producing a lot of growth where it's happening. I mean, the CBI has said it's you're getting 3 times the amount of growth in the net zero parts of the economy than you're getting anywhere else.
Well, if you throw money at things, then you get growth in the economy, don't you? There's a huge amount going into it, but we're also importing the huge windmills in the North Sea. They're being imported. They're certainly creating a lot of carbon dioxide in the production of the steel. If you put that money into the economy, you're going to get growth. And if you put it into other parts of the economy, you'd also get growth. But we're not doing that in other parts of the economy.
And we're in this week of very, very extensive English local elections and mayoral elections and indeed a by-election. Do you think the current net zero policy is costing Labour support in the places that you need to win?
Absolutely. I think the opinion polls are rarely completely wrong. I don't think we're in for a good night on Thursday. What I don't want to see are Labour spokespeople coming onto your show and other shows and saying we've got to communicate better. Some of the fundamental policies...
It's the actual policies, you think?
...need to change, not the communication of it.
All right, Graham Stringer, thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to LBC. A celebratory rally will march through the streets of Michigan later on, marking Donald Trump's first 100 days in office. But with polling indicating record lows in the president's popularity, is there really anything to celebrate? More on that next, but the time now 6:30 and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
The White House has accused Amazon of a hostile act over suggestions it was planning to list import taxes next to prices on its website. Donald Trump has imposed hefty duties on products from overseas, but the retailer says the idea was never a consideration for its main site. 3 people have been taken to hospital following a shooting in East London this afternoon. Emergency services were called to Forest Gate just before 3 o'clock. And a performance by the rap group Kneecap at the Eden Project has been cancelled following criticism over their comments about Tory MPs. The Belfast-based band allegedly called on fans to kill their local politicians. LBC weather clear for much of the UK tonight. Only some rain for Shetland. Otherwise a settled and relatively mild night. Lows of 5 degrees.
LBC This Morning on Nick Ferrari at Breakfast.
Foreign sex offenders face being deported as they will be banned from claiming asylum under new measures to be brought in by the Home Office. And we're joined by Home Secretary Yvette Cooper. Just to clarify, someone who then would face being deported, what's to stop them using Article 8 or Article 3 of the European Convention on Human Rights to fight to stay in the United Kingdom?
We've now increased the returns. Enforced returns are up by over 20%.
But there's nothing to stop that asylum seeker using the European Convention on Human Rights, is there?
We do get further legal claims that people will put in,
well, I take
but
that
that's
as a
why
no.
we're doing
so
two
the
further...
The Conservatives are right then when they said that the Human Rights Act can still be used for these people to block their attempted deportation.
People can make claims as they've been able to do for a long time, but we're doing a series...
At all, Home Secretary.
Nick Ferrari at Breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player, LBC.
apply.
This is LBC. Message Andrew Marr on WhatsApp now on 0345 6060 973.
6:34. In the States, far more than here, the first 100 days of a new administration is a very big deal. And tonight, Donald Trump is marking his wildly turbulent, hyperactive 100 days with a rally in Michigan. I wonder what he'll say about Canada. And indeed about the collapse in confidence in the US economy, which is down for the 5th month in a row to the lowest level of confidence since the pandemic, with a lot of anxiety, particularly over the impact of tariffs. On which note, the White House press secretary today attacked Amazon for listing the cost of Trump tariffs on its products. This, said the giant company, was never going to happen. But Caroline Leavitt called it a hostile and political act. If Jeff Bezos was was ever a friend of the Trump White House, he certainly isn't one now. Let's talk to Simon Marks, LBC's man in Washington. Simon, great to have you there. It's a difficult first 100-day celebration for Donald Trump, not just the Canadian vote, but also the opinion polls and the lack of confidence in the economy.
Yeah, but I don't think that's the way that Donald Trump is going to see it, Andrew, and we'll be hearing from him, as you know, tonight when he addresses that rally in Michigan, of course, one of the battleground states where he swept the board and secured the keys that have returned him to the Oval Office for the last 100 days. This, we are told, is going to be a speech celebrating 100 days of achievement. And what the White House claims, and what Donald Trump will insist, is that he has absolutely been the action man of modern-day American politics. He will argue that countries all over the world, including the UK, particularly China and other nations, have been beating a path to Washington, D.C., as he put it last week so eloquently, kissing his ass in a bid to secure an agreement to see the United States reduce some of the tariffs that are in place against them. He's going to argue that through more than 100 executive actions that he's taken over the last 100 days in office, he has put America back on the path to recovery, despite the fact that the stock markets are clearly still facing a battering. Economic confidence here has been sharply impacted by concerns that the United States is hurtling towards a recession. So there's going to be a clash in this speech between reality and the pretense that Donald Trump continues to try and promulgate whenever we hear from him.
And putting Donald Trump's ass elegantly to one side for a moment, it's going to be particularly interesting in Michigan because, as you say, a great victory for him in the election, but also one of the states most impacted by tariffs and one of the states which trades most, I understand, with Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. And he will argue, as he has done relentlessly, that there's a blip here. He's transitioning the economy away from the addiction that he claims Joe Biden had to public expenditure to an era in which he says manufacturing is going to be restored and renewed. Michigan, of course, the home of the auto industry, but also so heavily reliant on incoming products from Canada, including power, energy, electricity, which at one point the Premier of Ontario threatened to cut to the United States before Donald Trump backed down on at least one aspect of his trade war. So he's hoping to find the Republican Party faithful there. And at a time when Donald Trump's opinion poll numbers are sagging substantially, one poll over the weekend showing that his approval rating is down to 41%, the White House still believes that he is delivering on many of the core promises that he made to his supporters, not just in terms of restoring American manufacturing, which in reality is going to take years if it ever actually happens, but also, of course, with the mass deportations, which remain a hallmark of his policy and also a hallmark of his determination flagrantly to ignore court orders and provoke a standoff with the judiciary, leading to so many fears here that in the last 100 days, checks and balances that are in place on presidential power have to all intents and purposes melted away.
Well, talking about checks and balances, Simon, what do you make of his latest comments in an interview with The Atlantic about the possibility of running for a third term? He acknowledged it'd be very, very difficult and it would be very constitutionally controversial, but he didn't say no.
No, and indeed in previous interviews, of course, he's indicated that there are paths that he could look at that might allow him to circumvent that constitutional ban on a third term in power. One idea that's been floated here is that in the next presidential election, J.D. Vance or someone else, another cipher, might be the official presidential candidate. Donald Trump would be the vice presidential candidate. And then, lo and behold, after winning the election and being sworn in, the president would resign and step aside. So Donald Trump could return for a third term in office.
And would the Supreme Court accept that? I mean,
I
that
think
is
most
also
people here think that it's too
Yeah.
cute by half. Yeah, I think that that is really a stretch. But there's no question that the ambition is there, either for Donald Trump to serve a third term in office, and let's be honest, by the time 2028 rolls around, who can guess at this point what the state of America's electoral democracy will be in? But if it's not Donald Trump, it could be, I don't know, Donald Trump Jr.
Yeah. And let me ask you, not about Donald Trump Jr., but about another person who has been very, very prominent in the White House until recently and seems to be leaving almost, which is Elon Musk. Because Musk has gone back, we're told, pulled back from DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, with all those cuts, and spending his time much more on Tesla. Is that happening?
Well, I mean, he says it's happening. He says that he's going to be returning to the day job at Tesla, which, of course, has suffered dreadful financial consequences of his involvement with the Trump administration. Its profits for the first quarter down 71%. Elon Musk has shed $100 billion of his net worth since joining the Trump administration. He says he's going back to Tesla most of the time, but will still continue to work for Trump 1 to 2 days a week at the Department of Government Efficiency, which, of course, is not a Department of Government Efficiency. And by the way, Andrew, it's not even a model of efficiency. 100 days ago, Elon Musk told the American public that he was projecting to save them $2 trillion in public expenditure by the end of this year. He now concedes that DOGE, after all of that activity, which did consign hundreds of thousands of federal government workers to unemployment, all of that activity has fallen $1.8 trillion short.
Wow. Let's look at. There's so much to talk about, but I'm just going to keep on rolling at the moment because 100 days is 100 days. Do you think it's fair, despite everything we've been talking about, to say that the core Trump base remains solidly behind him? They're waiting for the economy to turn up. They're a bit worried about tariffs, but they are still basically got his back.
Yeah, I think there's no question that there has been movement in the public away from Donald Trump, but not necessarily movement in the public by his core supporters away from Donald Trump. They are still prepared in interviews and in polls to be willing to give him more time and still to believe in the message that he has been selling. Now, the Democrats, if you remember them, they certainly hope that by the time the midterm elections roll around in November of next year, they will be able to reverse Republican control in the House of Representatives and possibly also in the Senate. But, the problem is that many voters are also recoiling from the leadership of the Democratic Party. Democratic Party lawmakers in Congress have an even lower approval rating with the public than Donald Trump has in the White House. And they've got to find a way of reimagining the Democratic Party if they're ever going to be able to stop this Make America Great Again movement in its tracks.
Well, if they're waiting for a saviour, then they can look north to Canada, where, after all, the Canadian Liberals were in terrible, terrible trouble under Trudeau. He left, in came Carney, and tonight the rest is history. How do you think Donald Trump is going to deal with Carney and deal with the, frankly, slap across the chops he's had from the Canadian voter?
Well, the first thing to say is that he won't accept that it's a slap across the chops, because he will argue he bailed on Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative Party leader who lost his own seat in the Canadian House of Commons last night several weeks ago. Indeed, it almost seemed a few days ago that Donald Trump was poised to endorse Mark Carney. Didn't quite go that far, but certainly distance himself completely from the Conservative Party campaign. So Donald Trump even then was positioning himself. I think the real question that he has to confront is, given the national mood in Canada is now so hostile towards him and to his argument, a joke when it was first raised on November the 29th of last year in a conversation with then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau about Canada becoming America's 51st state. So resolutely have Canadians rejected that. Is he really going to continue pursuing down that path? Mark Carney, as you know, and as you've reported, has been very very outspoken today about withstanding American plans to try and annex Canada. And he now comes to the task with this mandate, with this majority to sit down opposite Donald Trump, which, of course, Justin Trudeau at the time really didn't have. So it's going to make a big difference in the bilateral relationship. But Trump is Trump, and he wants Canada to be America's 51st state, and he may not walk away from that rhetoric.
Simon, I think not for the first time, you have a fascinating speech to observe later on today. Thank you so much for talking to me. Now then, the suspect in an alleged crossbow attack in Leeds has died. 2 women were hurt when it happened in Headingley on Saturday. LBC's Yorkshire correspondent Alex Taylor-Brown now reports.
Counter-terror police who have been leading this investigation have confirmed that 38-year-old Owen Lawrence, who's from Headingley, died from a self-inflicted wound. On Saturday afternoon, as many people were enjoying the popular pub crawl, the Otley Run, there were reports of a man with a crossbow on Otley Road. Police were called at around 2:45. 2 women aged 19 and 31 were injured. One has been discharged from hospital whilst the other needed surgery for a life-threatening injury. We're told she's now in a stable condition. And the Otley Run is regularly full of groups of students, often in fancy dress, going from pub to pub, but it's an area with plenty of families as well. It happened just outside Millie and Alice's student home.
We were in the house and we had no idea anything had happened, and he must have run past our house. But then we saw all the police and stuff, and then we came out and we knew it was serious because they was making us go back inside. Yeah. And then we saw armed police.
2 of our flatmates were out as well at the time of when it happened, and they were trying to get back into the house. They had to be escorted back in because obviously they were out at the time it had happened.
Alex Sobel is the Labour MP for Leeds Central and Headingley and has called for more regulation on crossbows.
The 2 victims were both shot by crossbows, a weapon that has been used in murders before. I know the Home Office issued a call for evidence on strengthening controls on crossbows and public safety grounds, which ran from the 14th of February to 9th of April last year. Will the Minister now publish a response on providing further controls on the use, ownership and supply of crossbows after the horrifying attack on Saturday? We need to see action taken on these lethal weapons.
Counter-terror police have also confirmed 2 alleged Facebook accounts belonging to Lawrence are being assessed as part of their investigation. Images on social media appeared to show posts talking about plans to carry out a massacre just an hour before the attack took place. There were also images of a gun, baseball bat, as well as misogyny and far-right sympathies. Police are not looking for anyone else in connection and believe it to be an isolated incident. A file will now be prepared for the coroner. Alex Taylor-Brown, LBC News, Headingley in Leeds.
We're going to hear from the daughter of the murdered Conservative MP David Amess next, after comments from the Irish band Kneecap raised fresh concerns for the safety of MPs. The time now, 6:47.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
No asylum seekers who are known sex offenders can seek refugee status and will be deported, say the government. 4 letters, ECHR.
Ian Dale on LBC.
Conditions apply.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:49. The only good Tory is a dead Tory. Kill your local MP. Those are the words of the Northern Irish rap group Kneecap, recorded at an event in 2023. The fates of Joe Cox and David Amess remind us that real MPs face real mortal dangers. This is not a joking matter. The Eden Project in Cornwall has announced today they've cancelled the upcoming gig with the band as a result. And the group have now apologised, saying their words were taken out of context, though it's rather hard to understand what context would have made them acceptable. They say they reject any suggestion that we would seek to incite violence against any MP or individual ever. In which case, what do the 4 words, kill your local MP, seek to do? I'm joined now by Katie Amess, the daughter of the Conservative MP Sir David Amess, stabbed to death in his constituency in 2021. Katie, very kind of you to join us. This has been a kind of half apology, I suppose, by Kneecap. What's your reaction?
I don't really see that as an apology, because nobody's contacted me or my family. They just put out a statement online, just deflecting that they said that and saying it was taken out of context. They never spoke with anybody in my family to say, we did not mean these words. We understand your pain. We are extremely sorry for any heartbreak and distress we may have caused you. It was literally just a statement online that somebody passed on to me, and it doesn't address any of the issues. So I don't really think that is an apology, I'm afraid.
After your appalling family experience, do you think anything has got better in terms of MPs' safety and the general sort of civility of public conversation?
Absolutely not, because this happened to my father in 2021. It's now 2025, and we're still hearing this kind of dangerous rhetoric. And the inquiry that I'm pushing for into finding out why the perpetrator that did this to my father was allowed out on the streets, having been known to the authorities, that inquiry still isn't being allowed to happen. So we have no answers. We're no further forwards. And it's very, very unfortunate, because this isn't a joke. It's not a game. People have died because of this. And it's very, very dangerous for a young pop group or rap group, whatever genre they are, to be telling people to go and kill, let alone an MP, anybody. They're inciting murder. And that's the end of it. Stop.
They are a very, very prominent and, up to a point, successful group. I mean, they've had a big film made about them. They're very, very prominent. What would you like to happen? Would a personal apology from them to you make a difference?
They definitely need to apologise personally, yeah, because just apologising on the internet isn't an apology. Also, what about Joe Cox's family? I know her husband is probably very upset about this. And I think that the police are investigating, and that investigation needs to be thorough and vigorous, because who knows who's in the crowd listening to this? Any nutter or crazy person could actually act upon this. So they need to be careful what they're saying, because, as you say, if they are very prominent and successful, they're hugely influential then. And these young people that are listening to them could get any number of crazy ideas in their head. So they haven't thought this through, and it's just beyond stupidity that they would actually have said that.
It's normal journalistic practice to put an argument back against what you're saying, but I can't think of one. You're absolutely right. So,
I think
thank you very much indeed, Kate.
Art and it's creativity, but saying to kill somebody, that's not artistic. That's just a crime.
It's not creative. It's not artistic. Katie, thank you very much indeed for talking to LBC tonight. The Observer is the world's oldest Sunday newspaper. It famously took on the government during the Suez Crisis, and amongst its writers have been people such as George Orwell, Clive James and Robert Harris. In recent years, it's been part of the Guardian group, though the two newspapers always had certain tensions between them, I thought. It's now been sold to the website Tortoise, whose founder, James Harding, former editor of The Times and head of news at the BBC, joins me now. James, it's great to have you on the show. First of all, for people who don't know Tortoise, just tell us a little bit about it, who's backing it, who's the money behind it, and why you think it's going to be a good custodian of this very, very ancient newspaper.
Well, thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me on.
we set up Tortoise in 2018, got going really in 2019, and the reason for it was you'd seen what had happened in the news over the course of a decade. The financial crisis, the rise of political parties and political figures that were utterly new, clearly what was happening in technology. And I'd been at the BBC, as you mentioned at the time, and there was just this sense that the world was changing so fast and it was really hard to make sense of the world. And so we set up Tortoise as a slow newsroom.
Hence the name. It's slow news.
And the idea was if you took a little more time, might you make better sense of the world? And the reason why we thought it would fit well with the Observer and the investors you mentioned, we've always had a mix of investors. There's never been...
So you don't have somebody sitting on your shoulder saying, James, do this or do that?
No, we have a group of different investors, independent investors. They're all on the website if you want to go and look at them. And the idea was always that you would have real editorial independence. The Observer, when it was founded in 1791, had these principles: fundamentally independence, truth, and this wonderful phrase, the dissemination of all species of knowledge conducive to the happiness of society. But our thinking was that you could take us, a digital startup, we do podcasts, newsletters, live events, and take the Observer, which was in print on Sunday. And so you could take something which had this great heritage, a newsroom of great expertise, and put it together with something digital. And so we hope the combination of being passionate about print and proudly daily and digital will mean that we can renew a great name, as you say, of the Observer, that has long brought some of the best people in journalism to it.
I love that phrase, passionate about print, because I take it that means that it will carry on as what I would call a newspaper I could hold in my hand next to a cup of coffee, no longer a cigarette, but I could read it in the traditional way. That's not going to change.
No, that's not. And the reason for it is if you look at the models that are really working, whether it's The Spectator in this country or The Atlantic or The New Yorker in the States or Die Zeit in Germany, that mix of being in the real world, having something physical in print, and at the same time being accessible and available everywhere on screen. We've done that with podcasts, we've done that with newsletters. We're excited now. We launched, it's the Economist teased us actually because they said the Observer's discovered something new, the internet. And on Friday, for the first time in its 233 years, the Observer had its own website for the first time. So that's right, we are trying to make sure that we keep something in print and also develop something new in digital.
I watched the film that they put out of the Guardian journalists banging out in the traditional fashion, all the journalists from the Observer leaving the building, and it brought a sort of lump to my throat. It's moving, but do you think that the Guardian and the Observer never managed to meld their cultures properly?
It wasn't what I thought. I had the same reaction. I remember leaving the Times newsroom and for listeners thinking, what is that, a banging out? It's a very weird journalistic tradition, which is when you leave, the whole newsroom bangs the table. Back in the day, they would bang the
I think it was the printers, wasn't it, originally, with the hot metal printers?
And it's a very moving moment. Actually, but we start with huge thanks to The Guardian. In 1993, The Guardian stepped in and saved The Observer, and for 30 years put its resources and the talents and time of its people into it. But in the end, The Guardian, I think, had a vision which is to grow globally, to grow digitally. The Observer was a separate brand and a separate name in news, and we wanted to do everything we could to renew it.
You are taking on a very, very difficult job here. The legacy press is everywhere under pressure. We just, we know that. We know how many people are getting their news from their phones instead these days, and all the rest of it. And in addition, you as an ex-Times man, you're up against the Sunday Times, which is the best resource and in many ways the most formidable newspaper in the country every Sunday. It's a heck of a job.
It is a very difficult job. I think to myself, this is going to be hard work, but it's also incredibly exciting, Andrew, and on two grounds. As you say, one, you're right. There is going to be competition between the Sunday Times and the Observer, and that's a challenge, but you'd rather come at it as the underdog rather than the incumbent. But also, when you stand back and think, you mentioned George Orwell wrote for the Observer, he called it the enemy of nonsense. And if you think about the times we're in, to think of yourself as the enemy of nonsense means that you get up every day with a job to do.
It's a very good slogan indeed. You should put it on a big, big poster. I mentioned Robert Harris. There he was writing in the Observer this weekend. I enjoyed it very much. So very, very best of British, James. I hope it goes extremely well. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Andrew.
I will be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio, as well as listen to a range of podcasts. Download now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 10 on LBC, Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. A week ago, the government announced they would release nationalities of foreign criminals. Yesterday, they froze prescription charges, in their words, to under a tenner. What a bargain. And today, they've announced that no asylum seekers who are known sex offenders can seek refugee status and will be deported. Well, who, apart from ambulance-chasing human rights lawyers, would disagree with that? Anyone would think there's an election on Thursday. On Cross Question at 8, former DUP leader Baroness Arlene Foster, SNP MP Stephen Gethins, Right of Centre commentator Samantha Smith, and Labour MP Dr Peter Prinsley. And then at 9, Donald Trump is marking his first 100 days in office today. Have his first 100 days been a triumph or a tragedy?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 7 o'clock, the White House has accused Amazon of a hostile act following reports its plans to include the cost of tariffs in its price tags. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt has been speaking at the end of the first 100 days of his second term.
So this is another reason why Americans should buy American. It's another reason why we are onshoring critical supply chains here at home to shore up our own critical supply chain and boost our own manufacturing here.
Amazon has rejected the claims, saying it was